Let's get this set right. Good evening. My name is Kinney, and I have been a member of Christ Lutheran Church for almost 17 years. I am the adult choir director. I am a member of the Chime Choir, and I am serving my second year on our church council. I am blessed to be married to Andrew for more than 25 years now, and I am blessed to be mom to our 3 sons, Daniel, Will, and Nicholas. I am a music teacher, and I am currently directing 5 choirs for the Sulphur Springs School District. When I was asked to give my story of faithfulness, I thought of 3 versions. Maybe I'll call them layers. The first layer is short and sweet. It's the one you might get if you ask me on the way out of church, or if I'm getting to know the people at a soup supper at my table. I was born into a Christian family and baptized Lutheran in a little town in northwestern Wisconsin called Ellsworth. My mom was a church organist and a piano teacher, and my dad was the high school band director. When I was 3, my family moved to Port Washington, Wisconsin, in the southeastern part of the state because my dad got a new job directing bands at the high school there. My mom found work as an organist at the First Congregational Church in Port Washington, and that's where my family attended through my high school years. I went to Sunday school. I was confirmed. When I went to college, I sought out a Lutheran church because I had attended some services with my grandmother and with my best friend, Debbie, and I liked the biblical teaching and the more formal liturgy. I became a member here in CLC in 2006, and our boys have all attended Sunday school, and as of this fall, they will all be confirmed here as well. So, nice and tidy. 2 minutes. Sorry, Harold, if you need to go watch that show, you can. But I have a little more time, I think, and you all are friends, so I'll add a second layer. The thing about my going to Sunday school was that I missed quite a lot of Sundays growing up. It's kind of hard to imagine, but our church had 2 organists, and my mom shared the job with another woman, so they each played about every other week. And the thing was, we didn't often go to church when my mom didn't play. That, coupled with the fact that I seemed to get every cold and flu as a child, I missed more than half of the Sunday school lessons. When our kids came to Sunday school here, I would say, so, did they give you a paper with the Bible story on it? Can mommy see the paper? And I would read it, and I'd think, okay, tax collector named Zacchaeus is up in a tree. Okay, must have missed that Sunday. Between that and VeggieTales, I began to round out my knowledge of Bible stories. It was on one of those papers that was sent home from Sunday school that I learned one of my favorite Bible stories from the 2nd chapter of Mark. It's when friends cut a hole in a roof to lower their paralyzed friend down to see Jesus because they couldn't make their way past the crowd at the door. I feel like God has given me loving friends who have brought me to the feet of Jesus when I couldn't get there on my own. And now, confirmation. The truth is, I almost called off my own confirmation. Confirmation class was during freshman year, and we were to be confirmed in the fall of our sophomore year. Freshman year would prove to be one of the hardest years of my life. It was certainly the hardest year up to that point. That year, after never knowing the death of a close friend or family member, my grandfather died in September. My grandmother died in January. In March, good tune, I like that a lot. In March, One of my 14-year-old friends who took piano lessons from my mom. She loved horseback riding, and she was riding double bareback without a helmet. And she fell and hit her head on a rock. And 5 days later, she died. In May of that year, my dad had a former favorite band student who was now grown and had a family of his own. He was hit by a drunk driver and killed. Sometime during that year, one of my best friends, Julie, found out that her mom was dying of terminal cancer. Childhood abruptly ended that year. My friends and I clung to each other and tried to understand this new perspective we had been given. Life is tenuous. Never take it for granted. 2 months before I was to be confirmed, a tragedy would occur that would rock my faith. Unable to bear any more grief, I heard the news that my brother Chris's best friend, Tom, had been killed. He was on his second date with his new girlfriend, watching a movie at her house when her ex-boyfriend came and shot them both. She survived. Tom did not. Things like this didn't happen in our peaceful Midwestern town of 8,000. It made no sense. And Chris, my brother Chris, didn't have many close friends, but he had Tom until he didn't. My brother was at work when my parents got the call. Anger at God welled up in me as I saw them drive away to go tell him the news and bring him home. I remember running into a meadow in back of our house and staring up at the sky and screaming at God. How can you let this happen? How can I believe in you if you keep making bad things happen? How many people will you take away? I was going to call off confirmation. My friend Julie reached out to me. Her mom was in remission and her family was going to attend a concert at a church that week. Would I like to go along? I liked music, so I said yes. I don't remember the name of the group. I don't remember any of the titles of the songs. But I do remember there was a song about how God does not make bad things happen, but that he stays with you in the midst of them. Julie reached for my hand and gave it a squeeze as our eyes filled with tears. That gesture told me that she still had faith. I thought, if Julie can still believe in a loving God when her mom is dying of cancer, then I can too. I was confirmed that fall, and since that day, my faith has not wavered. It's not that I never have questions. It's not that I never have flashes of doubt, but I've never had a full-on faith crisis since then. I believe that a loving God is with us through joy and through sorrow. So, that may be enough, but I feel that God has been pressing me to share yet a third layer. So with God's help, I will. I really think this layer shows God's enduring faithfulness to me and to my family. This layer has a lot to do with my mom. My mom was a blessing and a trial. Some of you may be able to think of someone in your life who you might consider to be both a trial and a blessing. She was a blessing in so many ways. She told me she loved me every day, and she showed that love in myriad ways. She loved to read, and she told me that reading literature would teach me so much about different people. She was a wonderful musician, and she was my piano teacher for 10 years. She told me later in her life that sometimes she would fall asleep like this because after praying for an hour or more for everyone she could think of, she couldn't stay awake any longer. And now the trial part. The reason we didn't go to church on her off Sundays was because she was in bed until 11 or 2 or 4 p.m. My mother struggled with mental illness all of her adult life. To her credit, she sought help many, many times. Marriage counselors, doctors, psychologists. There were stimulants prescribed for day, sleeping pills for night. So many pills. When she was 50 years old, she finally met a woman psychologist who properly diagnosed her. My mom had bipolar disorder. The diagnosis had taken its time, and the disease had taken its toll. We used to call it being manic depressive, and to be honest, the manic phase could be fun sometimes. We used to giggle and giggle until we couldn't breathe anymore. Sometimes she'd take Debbie and I to a movie on the weekend, and in a time even before VCRs, if it was a good one, she'd come out and say, "We should see it again," and we'd buy tickets and march right back into the theater. Other times, the manic phase was not so fun, like when my hour-long piano lesson would turn into 2.5 hours, and I would finally run into my room in tears because I couldn't work anymore. One time, at least one time, she started practicing piano at 2 a.m., and we had a small house without a practice pedal, and I think I had a chemistry exam the next day. And then there was the depression. There was a lot of staying in bed, a lot of canceled piano lessons, and a lot of verbal abuse that was mostly directed at my dad. When I was a little girl, I used to get up and watch TV in our basement family room on the weekends or in the summer. Her bedroom was right above me. In the late morning, I would hear her stir, and I would stare up at the wooden beams and think, good day, bad day. Good day, bad day. I was listening for her steps because I could tell what kind of mood she was in by the sound of them. Sometimes, yes, good day. More often, bad day. I could tell by the way she sneezed what kind of mood she was in. I imagine it's similar for anyone who lives with dysfunction. I used to imagine that the depression was a big black dragon. Think Disney's Sleeping Beauty dragon. And I used to pray for God to take the black dragon away. I loved my mom. I didn't want her to go away. I just didn't like what she turned into when the disease took over. Thankfully, I never felt like I was really in danger. She never hit us, although she did throw things. There was a particular coffee mug that went through our dining room window 2, if not 3 times one summer. It felt like my dad was always sweeping up glass and replacing the window. It was a pretty tough mug. It got so my brothers and I didn't know when we were setting the table, should we put it at her spot? Because if we did, it might go sailing through the window again. But if we didn't, she might get mad. The point is, we were walking on eggshells almost all of the time. Now I need to introduce you to my brothers. You've already heard a bit about Chris. He is 7 years my senior, and though we're quite close now, when we were growing up, I thought he was going for Grumpy Teenager of the Year award. And to be fair, he probably thought I was going for Most Annoying Little Sister award. John was 10 years my senior, and almost like a third parent. Weekends were tough, because that's when my parents would fight. Or rather, that's when my mom would yell at my dad. I hated the yelling, and I would run into my brother's room in tears, where John would scoop me up and hold me and comfort me until I calmed down. Then he would play a game with me, either a board game or a card game, anything to get my mind off of what was happening in the rest of the house. I loved him so much, and I was so sad when he went away to college. My mom let me sleep in his bed after we had to say goodbye, and I would stare at the bulletin board he had on his wall. It was full of medals and ribbons and his gold tassel from being an honor student. He tells me now the track ribbons were for getting 3rd place in our tiny conference, but I thought they were amazing. I thought he was amazing. I guess you could say I idolized him. John went to college, and pretty soon there was a steady girlfriend. Her first visits to our house were okay, I think, but things quickly deteriorated. She wouldn't step on eggshells. She fought back. Threats were made. "You'll never see your grandchildren," she told my mom. Our family began to fracture. Relations were still strained when they were married, right before my freshman year in high school. Remember that year? My mother's depression deepened. I remember coming home in Debbie's car from play practice, either sophomore or junior year. And I came into the house and I heard my mom talking on the phone. And she said, "No, I don't have a plan yet." With that language, I knew she was on the line with the COPE hotline, a suicide prevention hotline in our county. Bad day. Again. I can't count the number of times she called that number, and those are only the times I knew about. But I will never meet the people on the other end of the line, but I will be forever grateful to them. We have a hotline, a national hotline now. It's 988. You can call, you can text, you can chat. If you're concerned about a loved one, you can call them too. It's 988. If you need it, please use it. It can really be a lifesaver. In the following years, my nephew and niece were born, and my family was allowed to see them. But shortly after my high school graduation, my sister-in-law made good on her threat. A letter arrived that said my mother would never again be allowed to see her grandchildren. The fracture was complete, and our family was devastated. The rift would last for more than 12 years. My mom went for help again, and that's when she met the psychologist who would properly diagnose her. The diagnosis made it a bit easier. We could blame things on the disease. We could rationalize a chemical imbalance in her brain. There was a period of 2 to 3 weeks of hospitalization, and then a long period of trial with different medications. It was definitely more like a farm than an Amazon delivery. I would say it took at least a year to find the right combinations of medications to help my mom manage her disease. I don't say cure because there is no cure, but the medications definitely made things better, eventually. During that year, however, my mother's suicidal thoughts became intense again. We didn't call it suicide watch, but that summer my dad and I just decided never to leave her alone for very long. In the evenings when I was done with work, I would sit with her. She was comforted by watching Disney VHS tapes, especially Winnie the Pooh. She said, "My therapist says when I feel like this, I just have to concentrate on getting through the next 5 minutes." So we would watch for 5 minutes. And she would say, another 5 minutes, and on and on. Those were some long minutes for me, and I can't imagine how long they were for her. My anger at my brother grew because I blamed him for causing this situation. Then there was a moment when my anger turned to hate. I walked past my mom's room and saw her tucking cards and small gifts into some decorative cardboard boxes. When she saw my questioning eyes, she said, "I just don't want them to think I forgot about them." I thought, how can John do this? How can he let this happen? Who does this? Something in me snapped and a wall went up and I closed off part of my heart and I thought, I hate him. They say you can't truly hate someone unless you've loved them first. And I think that's true. Because now the person I loved the most was the person I hated. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was a turning away from God on my part. The Bible is pretty clear on this. 1 John chapter 4, verses 20 and 21 says this, "If anyone says, 'I love God,' and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And this commandment we have from him, whoever loves God must also love his brother." Another year passed and I was home on another summer break. My mom was doing pretty well, so I was surprised one night when we were doing dishes, and she said, "It's been a pretty hard day." I asked her what was going on, and she said, "It's John's birthday." It had never crossed my mind. Flippantly, I said, "Why do you even think about him? Just forget about him." Okay, now I'm a mom, and I understand that there is no way that I will ever forget my son's birthdays. But in my 21-year-old arrogance and inexperience, I didn't understand. I thought you could just spare yourself the pain if you just forgot. Fast forward 7 years. I'm engaged to be married to the love of my life, Andrew Kinney, and I'm getting ready to send out invitations to our wedding. I was having dinner with another friend, an English teacher, and I said, "I don't know what to do about John. I don't want to send him an invitation. I don't think they'll come anyway." She looked at me and she said, "Do you know Dickens' A Christmas Carol?" And I said, "Yes, everyone knows Dickens' A Christmas Carol." She said, "Scrooge's nephew. Every year he invites his uncle to Christmas dinner, and every year Scrooge says no, except once. Sometimes all it takes is one more invitation." I went home and I mailed the invitation. I was not surprised at all a week later when the response card came back with a 0 in the spot for number of guests. I was surprised, however, 2 weeks later when I got a call from John. "Congratulations," he said. "I'm so sorry I can't come to the wedding. I would really like to meet Andrew." There again, a friend, my very dear friend and future husband, Andrew, was by my side. We met my brother at a restaurant, and I was very worried, you can imagine. What was this going to be like? What would we possibly say to each other after all of this time? When we saw each other, we embraced, and that began a season of rebuilding our relationship. A few years later, after his divorce, John visited my parents, and they began to repair what was broken. It was very much like a farm, or maybe a garden. A bulb that had been buried and had endured a very long winter. My parents finally met all of their grandchildren when John remarried a wonderful woman named Patty. And a couple years later, 3 of the 4 of them, and Patty's 2 children, were able to join us for my parents' 50th wedding anniversary celebration. It was a hard-earned anniversary for my parents, but one I think they were proud of in the end. Now, the reason I've told you all of this is threefold. First, in telling my mom's story, I hope I have done my part to destigmatize mental illness. We thought we were alone. Now you can Google famous people with bipolar disorder and you get a whole list. Some of them probably won't surprise you. Beethoven, Vincent van Gogh. Some people might surprise you. Astronaut Buzz Aldrin, Winston Churchill, Carrie Fisher, Frank Sinatra. Some have even speculated Sir Isaac Newton. If you struggle, I want to encourage you to seek help. If my mom were here, she would tell you that taking the medication and going through therapy was worth it. I know because she told me. I don't know how to explain affliction, why some people have it, some people don't. But I do know that we need you here. We need your song, your brushstroke, your turn of phrase, your equation, your design, your dance. Sorry. My mom told me that deep depression feels like you are in a dark pit and you can't get out. But she also told me that it doesn't last forever. Accept the helping hands that can lift you out of that pit. You are not alone. Jesus is always with you, 5 minutes at a time, just as I'm sure he was sitting with us. My mom would die from natural causes when she was 73. It seemed too soon. But in writing this, I realized it was a full 25 years after she was calling that hotline. 25 years, that's a long time. She got to see mountains for the first time. We don't have those in Wisconsin. And she got to see the ocean. She found out she loves seahorses. She got to hold her newborn Kinney grandsons and tickle them and giggle with them and watch them grow, read to them, paint with them, hear them tell her, "I love you, Grandma." She got to have holidays with all 3 of her kids under one roof again. In the darkest times, we could not see the road that God had laid out for her. We only saw a blind curve. We didn't dare to even hope for the blessings that were to come. I will never forget seeing my brother John say goodbye to her shortly before her death, holding her hand, kissing her cheek, saying, "I love you, Mom." If I've helped even one person in the telling of her story, our story, then it has been worth the telling. The second thing is that sentence. Sometimes all it takes is one more invitation. Is there someone in your life who could use one more invitation? I can't promise that it will work out, but I can say that it might be worth a try. In terms of faith, is there someone who could use one more invitation to attend church with you? How many times has Jesus invited me to make him more present in my life? I'm certainly glad he has not given up on me. Last, I want to say, please, please don't give in to hate. I will never go back there. We are called to be a loving people. Jesus says in John 13:34 and 35, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Hatred robs you. It robs you of time. It robs you of compassion. Just forget about his birthday. Hatred diminishes your very capacity to love. For all the bad things human beings can do to each other, humans also have a great capacity for love and compassion. We are called to be God's love here on earth. And you cannot do that if your heart is behind a wall and part of your soul has grown cold. Do you remember the boxes? A year after my mom died, we had to move my dad into a memory care unit. When John and his new wife, Patty, were cleaning out our childhood home, they found the boxes. They decided to give them to the kids, now adults, at Christmas that year. I was able to watch them open up the boxes. And I thought, good job, Mom. Because you see, even in the darkness, love remains. Even if it's hidden high on a dusty shelf in a room that hardly anyone enters, love remains, waiting to be revealed in God's time. Love is always there. God is always there. John 1:5, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." So, my faith story will continue. I have a goal of joining a Bible study. I need to mop up any remaining Bible stories, maybe gather some adult insight. As Pastor Garrett says, learning about God is a lifelong process. I look forward to the next time I see my brothers. We just saw them in December. We try to get together in the holidays and during the summer. I love Chris and John so much, and I am truly grateful that they are my brothers. John would move my dad to a care center in his town and would spend a lot of time with him. "Making up for lost time," he once said. And it was he who was at my dad's side when he passed away about 6 years ago. My friends remain a blessing, those that I've known my whole life and those that I've met in the 20 years since we've moved to Santa Clarita. My husband, Andrew, is a great blessing. I remember marveling when we were first married that every morning he just smiled at me. Good day, good day, good day. My dad was certainly a blessing. I know he does not qualify for sainthood, but he was a solid, loving, hard-working, steady presence in my life. He was my rock, and if I try to tell you how important he was to me, we'll be here for another half hour. So I would just say he was the best. And my mom. I'm focusing on the blessing of her these days. They say, be the things you loved most about the people who are gone. I am happy to hear her kind tone in my voice when I read aloud. I try to tell my children I love them every chance I get. I read so I can learn about different people, and I use the musicianship she passed on in my own music making and teaching. And I aspire to be a woman who falls asleep like this. Thank you.